Hi, my name is Leah Huynh. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, and today I'm going to be talking about dealing with in-laws and working through conflict with in-laws. And in my practice, what I see a lot is, or oftentimes the conflict is between the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law. So the husband, and then there's the wife, and then the wife usually has conflict with the husband's mother. So I'm not saying that that is the only time that we have conflict with in-laws, but that's what I'm going to be talking about today because that's where I see the most challenges, at least in my practice. When we're talking about these conflicts, a lot of times what I see is the husband, or the husband of the wife and the son of the mother, often feels caught in the middle because he's caught between two people that he loves, right? He's caught between his mother, who he loves, who birthed him and raised him, and then his wife, who he loves very much and is building a life with, right? And that becomes extra complicated when the husband has an especially close relationship with his mother, or he was brought up with a single mother. And I've seen that a lot too, where the husband feels like he needs to take care of the mom now because he understands the sacrifice that the mother went through and the hardships that she went through. So what adds another layer of complication, which I see a lot, especially in this area, is where the adult children are moving back home, maybe to save money or to save up for a house, and they're actually living with the in-laws. And so that is where things become even more intensified. And then the other layer, maybe factor that makes it more complicated is in cultures where the the parents are seen as there's more of a hierarchy there. So especially in Asian families where there's that filial piety, where we are expected to respect our elders. Not that other cultures don't respect elders, but that value is even more intensified. And so you can see how this would bring up conflict in not any, but in a lot of marriages. So my first piece of advice is for the husbands. So I know that for a lot of the couples that I see, the husbands oftentimes will tell the wife, oh, just don't worry about what she said, or just, you're too sensitive. That's not really what she meant. And that can feel very invalidating for the wife. First of all, because I think for the husband, you know that your mom loves you, right? So when there's that love, when there's that bond, when there's that history, it's so much easier to let things go, right? Secondly, when that's your mom, you've kind of learned how to cope or how to accept and how to deal with that person in your life, right? If you think about your wife, she's new to the family. She doesn't have that relationship with your mom, that same bond of trust as a blood relative, being her son. She doesn't have that lens where she can just love your mom and see her through her faults and see through the ways that maybe your mother has offended her. It's not going to be that same kind of relationship that she can do that, right? Secondly, because she may have grown up with a different way of growing up with her parents, she hasn't built ways to accept or to cope with the way your mother is maybe treating her or doing things that she doesn't agree with. It's hard. And thirdly, it's hard for your wife because she doesn't really have a voice, right? Maybe in her own home, she could tell her parents, they would get in an argument, they would hash it out, and then whatever, they would move on, right? When your wife is in your home, yes, she could convey her feelings to your mother, but if they get into an argument, that could mean a lot of implications long term. They don't have that same trust, right? And she probably, every daughter-in-law wants to be liked by her mother-in-law. Not every, but most of us, right? And so she doesn't want to do anything to ruin that relationship. And so she feels like she has to be silenced when she's offended by something or hurt by something, because she doesn't feel she can speak up. And let alone if the wife is living with the mother-in-law, it feels like she's silenced in her own home. So you could see how the wife just feels very isolated and alone and powerless, right? So that's where you as a husband have a very important role to support her and to validate her feelings. Now, what does that mean? Supporting and validating doesn't necessarily mean choosing sides. It doesn't mean going to your mom and telling your mom off and saying, hey, mom, you're horrible. It just means to show your wife that she is not alone, right? To say, hey, like, I can understand how you would feel that way. Like, I grew up with that all my life and I've learned to deal with it, but that's my mom, right? But I'm sure if I was in your shoes, like, yeah, that would be really hurtful. And yes, I totally understand. And, just kind of show that sense of support versus you're being too sensitive. That's not what she meant. Like, just stop, I don't know, making it about yourself or whatever. Don't put it on her to change, because that's going to make her feel alone, right? Lean into it a little bit and lean into her feelings. You're not leaning into the fact that your mom is a horrible person or anything like that. You're just leaning into, hey, my mom's not perfect, and I could see how you would feel that way, right? Let your wife feel like there's somebody that understands, right? The other thing that I see a lot too is where husbands get a little bit defensive when the wives bring things up. And I would say if you can see past the anger into the hurt, right? So anger is oftentimes a cover for hurt. And so if you can see past that, that in reality, your wife probably really does want to be liked by your mom. And when she's not liked, or when there's something that happens, there's hurt there, right? So if you can see past that and not get offended by what your wife is saying and kind of lean into the pain and say, I could see how you would feel that way, I think it would help calm her down a little bit. And the tip I have for the wives is I know that you're very angry or you're very hurt about what your mother-in-law is doing or has done, but know that that's also your husband's mother, right? Remember, that's the woman that has birthed your son and made him who he is, right? For better or for worse. And so when you're saying things like, I can't believe how selfish your mom is, or I don't know why she's like that, like I hate her, or whatever you're saying, right? Maybe it's not that extreme, but remember that the things that you're saying about her are actually about your husband's mom, right? So be careful about the way you phrase things. You can use things like, I'm really hurt when she said this, or give her the benefit of the doubt. Say, I know she probably didn't mean anything by this, but this really hurts. Or, this is the third time that she said this and I don't really know what to do. I'm feeling a little bit stuck, right? So try not to make it into a character accusation on his mom, because that way the likeliness of him becoming defensive and blocking that is going to be higher, right? And it's going to be harder for him to support you when he feels like you're insulting his mom, right? So that is very tricky on how to share about somebody that has hurt you. But all I'm saying is try to not put any jabs on her, not because you don't have a right to your feelings or anything like that. It's just your husband will less likely be able to give you the support that you need if you're saying it in that way. And the more you can say it in a way that is using I statements and things that are more talking about your feelings versus his mom's character, the more likely you're going to get his support. Now, if you want to rant and just be angry, do that with people that are outside, maybe your friends, or maybe, other people, your therapist, right? Other people that won't have a reaction to that. The other thing that I see happening a lot is I see the husband kind of withdrawing because he feels like, well, I can't get through to any of them, so I'm just gonna just kind of like sit back and lay low. And whenever the wife has anything to say or any kind of like feelings that she's showing, he'll say something like, well, you know what to do. You can talk it out with her, or why don't you just tell her how you feel? And I would say that's a really difficult position to put the wife in, right? And I know already, husband, you're already in a difficult position too, right? But I'm saying that is probably not the best way to handle it, because like I said before, your wife is an outsider, right? And she doesn't have the relationship capital with your mother to be able to talk to her about things that are very sensitive, right? She needs you to be that buffer for her. She needs you to be that translator, because if she goes directly to your mom, one, the emotions are going to be very high, and two, because there's not that relationship, there's much more potential for a big fire to come up, a big emotional fire, a big blow up, something that's going to really damage the relationship. Is going to take really a lot to repair. So my advice to husbands is to really, so remember I said the first step is to support and validate, right? And then the second is to come up with a plan, right? So sit down with your wife and say, hey, what would be helpful to you? And what I've seen is that different wives want to do different things based on what they feel the most comfortable. Some wives are just like, I just want to talk it out, and I want a place where I can relieve some of my complaints. I know that it's just because we're living together and it's really stressful. I just need you to hear me out. I don't need to do any, I don't want to tell her any of this. I would prefer to just keep it between the two of us, and I just want you to support me. The other thing you can do is offer to talk to your mom for your wife, right? Because oftentimes the wife may not feel comfortable talking to the mom, or she might feel like if she talks to her, it might not be good. Or maybe she feels like you have a really good relationship with them and it's not that big of a deal, so you could just tell them, right? So that could be the second option. The third option is to sit down and talk, all three of you, right? But in that case, you as the husband will need to be very, very keen on supporting your wife. And again, I'm not saying to trash talk your mom or anything like that, or be mean to her, or be disrespectful to her. It's just know that you are in your mother's territory. You and your mom have lots of history. Your mom already has a position of power because she is the mother. She's older. You may be living in her home, right? You need to really support your wife by making sure your mother is understanding what your wife is saying, making sure you're advocating for her, making sure that your wife feels heard and not that you're taking your mother's side, because that's what I see a lot in these conversations. Now, it's not easy. I'm not saying it's like, it is super difficult to navigate those kinds of conversations. I know, because I do that a lot in my practice, right? And when you're dealing with different cultures and different generations, there's so much that can be misunderstood. And so husbands, I do not expect you to get it right. I'm just saying, if that's something that your wife wants, then attempt to do that. Sometimes you can even talk to your mom beforehand and kind of soften her and say, hey, mom, like, my wife wants to talk it out. I know that she, really respects you and admires you. She's just feeling a little bit of A, B, and C. If you could just tell her that you accept her, I think that would be all good. And then if you went to your wife and just showed her that support and said, hey, my mom said you're like a daughter to her, that can soften both of them. So when they're coming together, it's much easier to come to a resolution, right? But it should not be a time to just lay all of your negative energy out there, because you know where that's going to go. It's going to be bad, right? We want to make sure that there's good energy flowing and that people are in a place to listen to one another. So the other thing I tell people is that sometimes it's just not meant to be to live in the same space as your in-laws. Of course, sometimes you don't have that choice, maybe because of financial constraints, or maybe you have a child that they help take care of for you. And in that case, you can work on building boundaries, right? Sometimes that's all you can do, right? Making sure you're not in the home at the same time, making sure you're just keeping the conversations very short, and making sure you're not too emotionally invested in anything each of you says. And sometimes you have to do that for the sake of peace if you can't work things out together. But if you can, sometimes moving out is the best thing, right? So hopefully those were some good tips for you. If you want more tips, you can go down to my website. I have a free course on how to stop arguing. It talks a lot about communication, and there's a workbook. You can also learn more about me if you want to work with me. If you need someone to help you navigate these tricky situations, especially when we're talking about Asian families, because that, like I said, that adds a different dimension, a different layer of conflict. You can go ahead and do that. My website link is down below, and take care.